Imagine stepping outside and it never stops raining. Not for a day, not for a month, not even for a lifetime, but for 2 million years straight. Cloud with rain sounds impossible, right? But around 233 million years ago, that's exactly what happened. Welcome to one of the most extreme climate events in Earth's history, a time when our planet turned into a giant, soggy, storm-soaked world. Scientists call it the Carnian pluvial episode, but you can think of it as Earth's great rainstorm. Picture this: volcanoes erupting non-stop, pumping massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the sky. The air thick with ash, temperatures rising, oceans steaming. Then suddenly, nature hits reset. The heat triggers endless storms. Rain pounds the continents for millions of years, carving out valleys, flooding forests, and transforming ecosystems. But here's the twist: this endless rain wasn't all bad news. In fact, it reshaped life on Earth forever. During this watery chaos, new species began to thrive. The very first dinosaurs rose to dominance. The ancestors of modern plants spread far and wide. It was destruction and creation, all happening at once. Oh, how do we know this epic storm really happened? Clues lie hidden in ancient rocks, fossilized mud, and chemical fingerprints left behind by the rain itself. Piece by piece, scientists are uncovering the story of the storm that changed everything. Join us as we dive into the deep past, to the time when Earth reigned for 2 million years, and from that endless storm, the world we know today began to take shape. Imagine waking up one morning to the sound of thunder rolling endlessly across the horizon. The air feels heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth and smoke. Clouds blot out the sun completely, turning the world a gloomy shade of gray. At first, you might think it's just another storm, the kind that waters the forests, fills the rivers, and then quietly passes. But this time, it doesn't stop. The rain keeps falling, day after day, week after week, month after month, and then year after year. The sound of raindrops becomes the soundtrack of existence. Trees bend under the weight of constant water. Rivers overflow and swallow entire landscapes. The sky becomes a ceiling of endless sorrow. And here's the unbelievable part: this wasn't just a bad storm season. This rain didn't end for millions of years. 2 million years, to be exact. Welcome to one of the strangest, wettest, and most world-changing events in Earth's history. The Carnian pluvial episode, the time when it rained for 2 million years straight. About 233 million years ago, the Earth looked very different from today. All the continents we know, Africa, Asia, the Americas, Europe, Australia, were still fused together into one gigantic landmass called Pangaea. Stretching from pole to pole, Pangaea was surrounded by a massive ocean known as Panthalassa. The climate was harsh and dry for most of the time, especially deep inside this supercontinent. Much of the land was covered in vast deserts, where the sun blazed relentlessly and only the toughest forms of life could survive. But this balance was about to be shattered by forces deep within the planet itself. Beneath the crust, massive volcanic systems were stirring to life, preparing to unleash chaos that would drown the world in storms. These volcanoes erupted in what scientists now call the Rangelia Large Igneous Province, an enormous region of volcanic activity located where Alaska and Western Canada are today. Over a relatively short period of time, geologically speaking, they spewed out unimaginable amounts of lava and gases. Picture fountains of molten rock bursting skyward, painting the air orange and red with fire and ash. These eruptions released massive clouds of carbon dioxide, sulfur, and water vapor into the atmosphere. The sky turned murky with volcanic dust, and sunlight struggled to reach the surface. The greenhouse gases trapped heat, warming the planet dramatically. Oceans absorbed much of this carbon, becoming acidic and unstable. The delicate balance of Earth's climate began to tip, and that's when the rain began. At first, it might have seemed like a relief. In the parched deserts of Pangaea, the first downpours must have felt like a miracle. The earth drank greedily, plants revived, and animals ventured out to enjoy the moisture. But soon, the rain became relentless. Storms swelled to monstrous proportions, fueled by the superheated atmosphere and vast evaporation from newly warmed seas. Lightning flashed across the continents with terrifying regularity, igniting wildfires even as the rain poured down. Rivers turned into raging torrents, carving through rock and soil, carrying sediment and nutrients across vast distances. What was once a barren, dusty world began to flood. Lakes formed where there had been sand dunes. Valleys disappeared beneath muddy torrents. The constant rainfall reshaped entire landscapes, leaving behind geological scars that can still be seen today. Scientists have pieced together this story from clues hidden deep in the rocks. Layers of sediment from this time show sudden shifts in composition, from red desert sandstones to gray mudstones rich in organic material, evidence of wetter, more humid conditions. Fossils of plants that thrive in moist climates start appearing where only drought-resistant species once grew. Chemical signatures within these rocks, the ratios of oxygen and carbon isotopes, tell us that the climate swung from extreme dryness to overwhelming rainfall almost overnight in geological terms. It's as if the Earth turned on a faucet that couldn't be turned off for millions of years. But this wasn't just a natural disaster. It was also a period of transformation. The endless rain triggered floods, landslides, and mass extinctions, yet it also paved the way for something new. Ecosystems collapsed, but others were born. Species that could adapt to the wet, unstable climate began to thrive. Among them were small, agile reptiles, the early ancestors of dinosaurs. Until this time, dinosaurs were minor players in the grand stage of life. They were just one group among many. But the changing climate gave them an edge. While other species perished in the chaos, dinosaurs evolved, diversified, and spread rapidly across the continents. The 2-million-year rainstorm had cleared the way for them to rise to dominance. And it wasn't just the dinosaurs that benefited. New types of plants began to flourish in the rain-soaked world. The humidity favored lush vegetation. Ferns, conifers, and the earliest flowering plants began to take root. With them came insects, amphibians, and small mammals that adapted to the new ecosystems. The rain had reshaped the surface of the planet, but it also rewrote the story of life itself. What had begun as a catastrophe turned into the foundation for the world as we know it. When scientists talk about the Carnian pluvial episode, they often describe it as a global reset button. It was an event that changed ocean chemistry, altered atmospheric gases, and reorganized life from the ground up. Think of it as nature's own reboot, one that wiped the slate clean after millions of years of stability and replaced it with a new world full of potential. And all of it began with rain, endless, unyielding rain that fell without pause for 2 million years. Imagine standing there, feeling the drops hit your face, realizing that this isn't a passing storm. This is your new reality. For generations upon generations, the rain would define everything, from the shape of the land to the survival of life itself. And yet, somehow, the earth endured. The storms finally weakened. The skies cleared. Sunlight returned to the soaked world. Forests regrew, rivers calmed, and the survivors began to rebuild their ecosystems. Out of the mud and ruin came the first great age of the dinosaurs, a period of innovation and expansion that would dominate the next 165 million years. The rain had washed away the old world, but in its place, it had given birth to a new one. A world of giants, forests, and evolution on a scale never seen before. The next time you hear the soft patter of rain on your window, remember, our planet once faced a storm that lasted longer than the entire history of human civilization. And from that endless downpour, life didn't vanish. Long before the endless rains began, something was stirring beneath the surface, deep within the molten heart of the earth. Beneath the crust of ancient Pangaea, massive chambers of magma were rising, pushing and straining against the rocks that trapped them. For millions of years, the pressure built silently. Then, without warning, the planet began to roar. The ground split open. Fire burst from the cracks, and rivers of lava poured across the landscape like glowing blood. The air filled with the smell of sulfur and smoke. It was the dawn of an eruption so vast that it would change the course of life forever. The birth of the Rangelia volcanic province, one of the largest and most violent volcanic events in Earth's history. The eruptions didn't come from just one volcano. Imagine thousands of them, scattered across what would one day become Western North America, erupting again and again over hundreds of thousands of years. Lava spilled out over vast plains, burying forests and deserts alike. In some places, the molten rock spread for hundreds of kilometers, creating layers of basalt thicker than skyscrapers are tall. Each eruption sent clouds of ash and gas into the sky, darkening the sun and turning the air toxic. The world trembled under the power of a planet remaking itself. And yet, as terrifying as the fiery scenes were on the surface, the real danger came from what couldn't be seen: the gases. With every eruption, enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur dioxide were blasted into the atmosphere. These gases began to trap heat like a global blanket, slowly transforming the climate into a pressure cooker. The temperature began to rise, oceans warmed, and the balance of Earth's climate system started to falter. The sky, once clear and blue, grew hazy and heavy with volcanic dust. The sun's rays struggled to reach the surface, and the planet's weather patterns began to twist in unpredictable ways in the days and weeks following each eruption, the world might have seemed like it was ending. Ash fell like black snow. The air was thick with haze. But over the years, something strange began to happen. As the volcanic gases mixed with moisture in the air, they triggered massive rainstorms. The hot, carbon-loaded atmosphere held more and more water vapor, and when it finally condensed, the skies opened up. The rain came not in bursts, but in torrents that refused to stop. It was as if the planet had started to cry, not for days or decades, but for millions of years. This was the beginning of the Great Rain. Imagine standing on that ancient world, lightning flashing across a blood-red sky, thunder rolling across continents, and sheets of rain falling so hard it flattened everything in its path. Rivers turned into raging oceans, mountains bled with mud and ash, and coastlines vanished beneath endless floods. The once dry heart of Pangaea became a vast swamp, teeming with new life and decay. It was chaos, beautiful, destructive, unstoppable chaos, and through it all, the volcanoes kept burning. The eruptions continued for hundreds of thousands of years, sometimes pausing for brief centuries, then roaring back to life. Each time they erupted, they added new gases to the atmosphere, feeding the endless cycle of heat and rain. Scientists believe this cycle of volcanic outbursts and climate upheaval lasted for around 2 million years, long enough to reshape every continent, every ocean, and nearly every form of life. The rain carved new landscapes into existence. Entire mountain ranges were eroded, valleys deepened, and plains turned into lakes. The volcanic ash that blanketed the world eventually mixed with the rain and soil, creating fertile ground, the perfect conditions for plants to take over. What had once been scorched rock became a lush, green paradise, at least for those species able to survive the flooding. Ferns, cycads, and early conifers thrived, spreading across the damp world in dense forests. For the first time in millions of years, the earth was covered in green again, but not everything survived this transformation. Many species that had once ruled the dry Triassic deserts couldn't adapt to the constant moisture. Amphibians, reptiles, and early mammal-like creatures perished in the shifting climate. The endless storms also disturbed the chemical balance of the oceans. When the volcanic carbon dioxide dissolved into seawater, it turned the oceans acidic, killing off corals and many marine species. It was a slow-motion catastrophe that touched every corner of the planet. Yet, as always, where some life died, other life found opportunity. Deep in the steaming forests of the new, rain-soaked earth, small, nimble creatures began to thrive. Among them were the first true dinosaurs, not the massive predators we picture today, but swift, bird-like reptiles the size of dogs. They were quick, adaptable, and perfectly suited to the new environments. While larger, slower creatures struggled in the mud and floods, these dinosaurs ran, hunted, and multiplied. Evolution was quietly shifting the balance of power. The Great Rain had cleansed the old world and given birth to a new dynasty. The volcanoes didn't just bring destruction, they brought change. They created new minerals, released nutrients into the soil, and altered the chemistry of the oceans. Every eruption was both an ending and a beginning. Over time, as the last of the Rangelia eruptions faded and the skies slowly cleared, Earth began to stabilize. The rains weakened. The thick clouds thinned, revealing the sun again. But the planet that emerged was not the same one that had existed before. It was greener, wetter, and full of life that had evolved to fit this new, unpredictable climate. In many ways, the Rangelia eruptions acted like the planet's great sculptors, tearing down and rebuilding, wiping clean and starting anew. Without them, the dinosaurs might never have risen to dominance. The lush ecosystems that followed might never have formed. The Earth, as strange as it sounds, might have remained a dry and barren land. The volcanoes destroyed nearly everything, and in doing so, they made room for the future. Even today, geologists can find the fingerprints of those eruptions in the rocks of Alaska and Western Canada. Ancient layers of basalt stacked like pages in a storybook, each one marking another outburst of fire from the deep. When you touch those stones, you're touching the memory of an Earth that nearly drowned in its own rain, an Earth that burned before it wept. The next time you see a volcano erupting, spewing fire and smoke into the sky, remember that this is part of Earth's heartbeat, the same rhythm that once created the Great Rain, that turned deserts into jungles and chaos into life. The volcanoes that drowned the world didn't just end an age, they began a new one. The world had become a single symphony of rain. Day and night blurred together beneath a sky that never stopped crying. The horizon disappeared behind walls of gray, and every sound, every rustle, every movement was drowned by the constant whisper of falling water. For those living in that ancient age, there was no memory of a time before the storm. It had become the only rhythm life knew. The Earth had entered its long, wet twilight, an age when the clouds were kings and sunlight was a myth. Imagine standing on a ridge of soaked earth where a great forest once thrived. The trees, heavy with moisture, bow under the weight of endless water. Their roots grip the flooded ground like desperate fingers trying not to slip away. The soil beneath them is no longer firm. It slides, it shifts, it breathes with the rain. Every drop that falls is carving, shaping, wearing down the bones of the world. Valleys deepen, mountains crack. Great rivers roar like beasts freed from cages, devouring everything in their path. The land itself seems alive, restless, unsteady, forever moving. In the lowlands, entire ecosystems collapse and reform again within centuries. Lakes form overnight where dry plains once stretched for miles. Whole forests drown beneath rising waters, while new ones spring up on islands of sediment carried by the floods. The air is thick with humidity. It clings to skin, bark, and stone alike. Lightning dances across the sky, illuminating a world of steam and shadow. Each bolt strikes with such power that it fuses sand into glass. The earth trembles under the violence of its own weather, but amid the chaos, life refuses to surrender. In this drenched new world, new species adapt with astonishing speed. Amphibians, once confined to rivers and swamps, begin to flourish across the soaked landscape. Early reptiles learn to hunt among flooded forests. Primitive mammals burrow deep into the mud, building warm, hidden shelters away from the storms above. Evolution is no longer a slow crawl. It's a sprint, a desperate race to survive under skies that never rest. The constant rain transforms even the air itself. Every breath carries the scent of wet stone, decaying leaves, and distant lightning. Sunlight, when it manages to pierce the thick clouds, feels almost alien, a faint golden glow that shimmers on flooded plains like a forgotten memory. The world has grown quieter, in a way, not peaceful, but muffled. The storms are everywhere, but there is no escape, no shelter from the sound of falling rain. And still, deep beneath the churning oceans, volcanoes continue their slow, steady heartbeat. The Earth's mantle shifts, sending more warmth upward, keeping the cycle alive. The rain feeds the seas feed the sky, and the sky feeds the storms again. It's a perfect loop, a planet locked inside its own breath. To the creatures living through it, this is not an event or an episode. It's simply life. They know no other world but this one, wet, unstable, and alive in ways that defy imagination. The endless storms change more than just the landscape. They change time itself, or at least the way it feels. Seasons vanish. Years lose their meaning. Without dry months to mark the cycle of life, growth and decay blend together. Forests bloom and rot simultaneously. Rivers carve new courses faster than species can migrate. The planet becomes a living experiment, reshaping itself faster than any generation of life can predict. And through this chaos, evolution writes its most daring chapters. As the centuries rolled on, the rain became more than just weather. It became a sculptor, reshaping every feature of the planet. Mountains melted into valleys, and valleys into lakes. Rivers braided and split like veins, their waters thick with silt and minerals torn from the ancient crust. The oceans swelled with runoff, rising higher and higher, swallowing coastlines and lowlands. The entire face of Earth shimmered beneath a cloak of water. From space, if anyone had been there to see it, the planet would have glowed a deep blue-green, half vapor, half sea. Beneath the clouds, life learned to dance with disaster. Every creature that endured the storm carried the story of adaptation in its bones. Early dinosaurs, small and wiry, darted between soaked ferns and steaming pools, their skin glistening with rain. They hunted in silence, their sharp eyes adjusting to the dim light. Their world was humid, treacherous, but full of opportunity. These first giants in the making thrived where others drowned. Each drop of rain that fell pushed evolution forward, rewarding resilience, speed, and ingenuity. Plants, too, transformed. Ferns and conifers spread like wildfire. Though in this world, it wasn't fire but water that cleared the way. Their roots grew stronger, able to grip unstable, soggy soil. Some even developed waxy leaves to survive constant moisture. Every gust of wind carried their spores and seeds to new lands, and soon, entire continents blossomed under a blanket of green. This explosion of vegetation pumped fresh oxygen into the atmosphere, fueling larger and more energetic forms of life. The rain, destructive as it was, had become the engine of creation, but for every victory, there was loss. Many ancient species, those that had ruled the arid Triassic world, could not adapt. The great reptiles of the deserts, the fish that needed calm, clear water, the plants that relied on dry soil, all began to vanish. Extinction swept through like a tide, claiming the unprepared. Yet this cleansing, painful as it was, left behind fertile ground for the survivors to thrive. From chaos came order, from destruction, new beginnings. Over the course of millions of years, the storms began to slow. The skies, once heavy and dark, started to lighten. The volcanic fires deep beneath the crust cooled, and the endless chain of eruptions finally waned. The earth, exhausted by its own fury, began to heal. Slowly, the clouds thinned. Shafts of sunlight pierced the mist, glimmering across flooded plains. For the first time in what felt like eternity, the world saw color again. Blue skies, golden light, and the deep emerald of forests reborn. Imagine that moment. The final drops falling from the sky, hitting the surface of a planet transformed. The silence afterward would have been profound, the kind of silence only a world can know after 2 million years of endless thunder. Rivers, once raging, now flowed calmly to the sea. Forests flourished in the newfound balance of rain and sun. Oceans teemed with life. The scars of the storm remained, in eroded cliffs, deep canyons, and the strange chemistry of the atmosphere. But life had adapted, stronger and more diverse than ever before. And there, amid the dripping leaves and steaming soil, the first great dinosaur lineages began their march into dominance. The world had been cleansed, reshaped, and renewed. And now, the stage was set for the Mesozoic era to truly begin. The endless rain had not destroyed life. It had rewritten the grand history of our planet. The Great Rain was both a tragedy and a rebirth. It showed that Earth is not fragile. It is alive, dynamic, and endlessly creative. Every storm, every eruption, every flood is a chapter in a much greater story, the story of transformation. And as the final clouds drifted away and sunlight warmed the wet earth, life took a deep breath, ready to evolve again. Because even after the longest storm in history, the lesson was clear: life on Earth always finds a way. When the storms finally began to fade, the Earth took its first deep breath in millions of years. The skies, once dark and swollen with endless clouds, slowly began to clear. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the thinning gray, spilling gold across the soaked continents. The world glistened, every leaf, every river, every stone shimmering beneath the dawn of a new age. After 2 million years of unbroken rainfall, silence returned. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of renewal, the quiet before the next great chapter of life began. The earth that emerged from the great rain was unrecognizable. Where deserts had once stretched endlessly, lush forests now swayed. Valleys that had been carved by ancient floods glittered with lakes and rivers. The air, heavy with moisture and life, carried the scent of new growth. The rain had erased the old world, but in its place, it had written something extraordinary, a planet more fertile, more alive, and more balanced than before. This was the world that would give rise to the age of the dinosaurs. For the creatures that survived the storm, adaptation had been their salvation. Evolution, accelerated by chaos, had sculpted new forms and instincts. Small, nimble reptiles that once hid in the shadows now found themselves in a world made for them. These early dinosaurs, agile, warm-blooded, and fiercely adaptable, thrived in the post-rain landscape. Their legs grew longer, their movements quicker, their lungs more efficient in the thick, humid air. They hunted across mossy plains, their eyes bright and alert beneath the shimmering sun. In just a few million years, they would dominate every ecosystem on Earth, from steaming jungles to windswept coasts. The Great Rain had not just cleared the stage, it had chosen its stars. The transformation wasn't limited to the land. In the oceans, the endless rain had washed nutrients from the continents into the seas, sparking massive blooms of plankton and algae. The food web exploded with energy. Fish diversified, coral reefs began to reform, and marine reptiles, the ancestors of plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs, took to the waters with grace and power. The oceans became vast, living machines, teeming with life in every drop. The storm had flooded the planet, but in doing so, it had refueled its beating heart that on land, plants reached new heights, literally. Towering conifers and giant ferns created dense canopies that stretched for miles. Beneath them, the air was thick and warm, alive with insects and the calls of primitive creatures. The forests became the lungs of this new world, pumping oxygen into the atmosphere and stabilizing the climate. Each tree that rose from the soggy soil was a monument to survival, proof that even after the longest storm, life could not only return, but thrive beyond imagination. In the quiet aftermath of the deluge, entire ecosystems rebuilt themselves with astonishing speed. Amphibians adapted to both water and land. Insects diversified into new species, and mammals, still small and secretive, evolved sharper senses and better brains to navigate their complex environments. It was a time of opportunity, a biological explosion. The harshness of the storm had forged resilience into every living thing. And now that resilience was paying off, the Earth was bursting with invention. This rebirth also changed the climate itself. The thick forests that now blanketed the continents absorbed carbon dioxide from the air, cooling the planet gradually. The volcanic heat faded, and a new stability emerged. The weather patterns that followed were calmer, gentler, a rhythm of sunshine and rain that nourished life rather than destroyed it. For the first time in millions of years, balance returned. And in that balance, something remarkable happened: diversity. Before the Great Rain, life on Earth had been relatively uniform. Simple species scattered across dry plains and arid deserts. But after, the explosion of habitats created a mosaic of possibilities. Every environment, from swamps to mountains, from lakes to coastlines, offered a new niche, a new chance for evolution to experiment. The result was nothing short of spectacular. Dinosaurs rose as rulers, but they shared their world with a thriving cast of creatures: giant amphibians, early crocodiles, flying reptiles, and the first tiny mammals hiding beneath the ferns. The world had become a grand symphony of life, each note born from the rhythm of survival that if you could stand there then, among those steaming jungles and shimmering rivers, you'd feel it, the pulse of a living planet reborn from chaos. Every breeze carried the echo of the storm that had ended, every drop of water a reminder of what came before. The Earth had endured its trial, and in doing so, It had discovered its greatest strength, the ability to begin again. From the ashes of fire and the tears of endless rain, the Mesozoic era had begun. It would become one of the most extraordinary ages in our planet's history, an era of giants, of towering forests, of endless innovation. The Great Rain had been a crucible, and from that crucible emerged a world more beautiful, more vibrant, and more alive than ever before. The storm was over. The sun had returned. And in that light, life stretched its arms toward the sky, ready to write the next chapter of Earth's timeless story.